Hi, my name is Barry Sterling Mitchell. I produce the Sterling Net Point Power Rankings and the Bias Plus reports. And this is Ben and Barry on football.
Hello out there. This is Ben Dickerson. I'm your co-host on Ben and Barry on football. And we are days away from the Super Bowl. Extremely excited. So let's get this thing going.
Well, this is sort of a Super Bowl special show, Benny. We actually kind of let the let the cat out of the bag? Is that the old statement when we talked about the Super Bowl last week and last week's show? But this week we're going to go back and we're going to revisit it. And because this week's show is going to be the first show, Benny, where we are actually going to be also on the radio. WJRL95.3.com at WJRLradio.com. So not only are we going to be on YouTube, and we're always on the other social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, etc., but we also have our podcast, which is there. You can find our podcast on both Spotify, and guess what? I just got notification that we are now, I just saw it on here somewhere, going to be on Apple. We're going to be in the Apple podcast. I saw that on here somewhere. Now I can't find it. In any event.
That's excellent because everybody I know has an iPhone. Except me.
Well, I mean, I'm one of those people. Once I got into the ecosystem, I use it in so many different ways. Recently, my email provider went to Microsoft Teams, and they also have their ecosystem. And I'm just trying to stay in one. I don't want my, to be using two. I don't need, all of that. But because they also have, and we're on Zoom here, they also have their Zoom type feature, their video recording feature, it makes it attractive. So lots of technology going on, but we're going to be on the radio here. We're going to talk a little bit about what we do. So let's kick it off with the Sterling Net Point Power Rankings, or as I like to say, the Sterling Pro Football Net Point Power Rankings. Talk about that, how we use it as a basis for our discussions on football. So just in general, understand that net points is simply the difference between points for and points against. Points for being the points that were scored, points against being the points that were allowed. So Benny, we like to explain what the Sterling Net Point Power Rankings are, or as I like to call them, the Sterling Pro Football Net Point Power Rankings. And really, it's just the difference between points for and points against. When the NFL puts out their statistics, that's what they talk about. Points for being the points that a team scored, and points against being the points that a team allowed. So if Team A is playing Team B, and the final score is 20-10, then the points for Team A was 20. The points against for Team A was 10. And the net points is the differential, which is 10. Now for Team B, right, they allowed 20 points. They only scored 10. Their net point differential is a negative 10. So we always like to remind people that at any point in the season, half of the teams are in the negative. This is one of those statistics that have both a negative and a positive component to it. And the other one that we'll talk about at a later point is turnover differential. So we like to look at what a team actually did and then utilize that as a basis for information about what they might do. And we'll talk about that in the next segment. So what I'd like to do is take this concept of net points and how we use it to rank teams. This is our objective ranking systems. We rank the teams by net points. Team with the greatest greatest net points is number one, and with the least net points or the most negative is 32. So you have 32 teams and you have that range there. So what I wanted to do was take this concept of net points and begin to rank the team. And what we're going to do is go back and look at the last 5 years Super Bowl winning teams and see where they came in on the net point rankings. Because as we always like to remind people, this is simply a fun football experiment. I started working with this 5-6 years ago, really began to track it maybe about 4 to 5 years ago, and developed it beyond that, where we began to see some trends come out of this. I like to compare it sometimes to an unmanaged mutual fund like the S&P 500, an index fund. It is what it is. The numbers are what they are, and they'll go up and down based on the system that we've put into place here, and we simply like to track that. So let's take a look. And before I do that, let me again jump back to my co-host here, Mr. Ben Dickerson. You are of the fantasy world. You are still a coach in football, but you have taken a look at the net point rankings, and you have basically some ideas and thoughts about it on your own.
Well, first of all, I like to say that I'm not a crazy person who lives in a fantasy world, which is how that came off there.
Well, we can argue about that a little later, okay?
Well, yeah, okay, that can be another broadcast. But for now, I do play fantasy football. I've been playing fantasy football for an extremely long time, probably longer than most people who are watching this right now. I've been playing fantasy football since the late 90s, okay? Before there were actual websites that carried fantasy football leagues, we had to determine wins and losses and points through the box scores in the newspaper. So that's how far back I go with fantasy football. And fantasy football, for those of you who may not know, and I'm sure just about everybody, if they don't play it, they know someone who does, is based on the actual output of particular players in the NFL week by week. But what you do is you have a draft at the beginning of the season, and you choose your skill position players along with kickers and defenses to build your own team, okay? So you will have different players from different teams put together to make a 9-man roster, 1 quarterback, 2 running backs, sometimes 2 or 3 wide receivers, maybe a tight end, a kicker, and a defense, depending on the type of a league that you're in. But everything is based on what the players actually do, and each particular statistic has a point value. For instance, obviously a touchdown is worth 6 points, but a quarterback will get 1 point for every 25 yards that he throws. A running back and a receiver will get 1 point for every 10 yards that they progress the ball. Defenses usually get a point or 3 points depending for a sack, and you get 3 or 5, which is more than a sack because of for interceptions and fumble recoveries, which obviously are turnovers and are of more statistical value than a sack, and so on and so forth. Now, the reason that I really took interest in the net point power rankings was because sometimes when you're playing fantasy football, you try to, figure out who you're going to start from week to week. And you can watch all the programs on television and what have you. But the net point power rankings gave me a very, very clear and concise picture of what one team was doing as opposed to the team that they were actually playing. And it helped me make the decisions as to who I was going to start. So that was the great thing about it. That's what first piqued my interest. But after that, I'm just into it for what it is, man. It's a great system. There's no opinion. There's no conjecture. It's all about the numbers.
Yeah, that is part of our hashtag, no opinion, no conjecture. Let's take a quick look at the application of the concept of the net point power rankings as they would apply to the existing Super Bowls. All right, so we're going to take a look at sort of the last 5 years Super Bowl, Benny, and see how we would apply some of the concepts of the net point power rankings. So can you see that okay?
Yes, I can.
Excellent, excellent. Whoops. Hey, WJRL 95.3, Soul and R&B Radio. All right, Super Bowl team rankings. So, Ben, I look back about 5 years. We can go back to Super Bowl 50 in 2015, all the way at the bottom, and we see that the Super Bowl winner was the Denver Broncos. Doesn't that seem like a millennial ago now? It seems like so long ago.
Yes, it does. But I tell you what, the greatest thing I see right there is they finished the season with a 12-4 record, but their net point power ranking was 10. They were 10th.
In the last 5 years, that's the lowest of any Super Bowl winner. And when you look at the next column, just to run through the columns real quick along the top, you'll see Super Bowl. I give you the Roman numeral for it and the season year, the regular season year, because the bowl is always in the year afterwards. Super Bowl winner. Just for the Breaking My Heart segment, I have the Super Bowl loser there. Everybody sees me with my Niner stuff on. And I kind of wore my Niner stuff to let people know we are fans. I'm a Niner fan. You're a Giants fan. But the no opinion, no conjecture applies here. So it is what it is. The numbers will say what they say. And our fandom really just has to take a step back, in this situation. But when you look across the top, the Super Bowl loser, the win-loss record, the net point rankings, so where they fell in the rankings, the actual net points that we talked about. The next column, I needed to type that a little bit better, Benny, but that's points for rankings. So we talk about the net points being the difference between the points for and the points against. So you have your points for ranking, your points for, your points against ranking, and your points against. So when we go to the bottom and we look at every Super Bowl since 2015, you'll see that the net point ranking was a lot higher. This was sort of an anomaly. And the Panthers, if I'm not mistaken, I would have to go back, were actually favored, I do believe. I mean, this was Cam Newton in his prime.
Yeah, I believe that they were favored in that game. It might not have been by much, but yes.
The other thing that interesting here is that the Broncos were not, this was a Peyton Manning year, right?
Yes.
They weren't scoring a bunch of points. They ranked 19th in scoring. They had only put up 355 for the season. As you can see, of all the teams, well, you do have a few teams that were a little less than that. 325 for the Patriots in their 2018 season, 308 for the Chiefs in their 2019 season. But those Broncos were ranked number 4 on defense. They were not giving up a lot of points. So that's one of the things that I think that's interesting in this situation. The other thing was the two-way tie in 2017 with Super Bowl 52 with the Eagles and the Patriots. That was the first time where you had two teams actually in the regular season tied for net points at 162. And they got there in slightly different ways, but the Patriots, man, they were a powerhouse that year, man. 457 points scored, 295 points allowed for a number 4 ranking. The only time that they were actually better in points against, and their defensive ranking was the year they beat the Falcons. Strangely enough, offensive coordinator is now my coach with the 49ers. So, lots of stuff going on there. As you can see, the Chiefs and the Bucks are coming at Super Bowl 55 here with slightly different records. The Bucks actually lost 5 games. The Chiefs only lost 2. And that was early on with the Bucks. You remember their early part of their season?
Yeah, it was a little rocky, especially offensively. Took a little time for Tom Brady's skill set and the types of things that he really likes to do and is comfortable with to mesh with Bruce Arians and Byron Leftwich's offense. But they put their heads together.
Now, for the Chiefs for the same year are a little bit behind in the scoring. And that's what was throwing us off when we talked about the game last week. The Chiefs had not been scoring a lot. They came out, though, in the conference championship and put up some serious points.
Well, okay.
I mean, they have been scoring on average of 20, and they put up 30-something against the Bills.
That's true. And basically all they did in that particular game was what they had been doing for the majority of the season. So it makes it tough when you try to figure out what was going on. Was it a little roadblock, a little bump in the road offensively? Were they trying some new things? Were they, I know they had some injuries to some key people here and there. Maybe they dialed it back a little bit. Who knows?
Well, we just wanted to I just wanted to put together a little chart for the people to take a look at, get an idea. Number one, we found out just in this experiment that number one doesn't always, but twice has actually won the Super Bowl. Number two, they're generally in the top 5 to 6. And number 10 is almost an anomaly. Normally they're not the team that's going to get there, even though they're in the top half. So wanted to kind of give an example of the Super Bowl rankings. We're going to move on toward the Bias Plus reports, unless you have something more to say about this.
No, just the fact that when you first started this thing and you started showing me some of the numbers, one of the first questions I had was, where were the Super Bowl teams ranked at the end of the season? That really piqued my interest. Like, were the 2 teams that made it to the Super Bowl like 1 and 2 or 1 and 3 or 2 and 4? And then that got you going. And then, I asked another question. You said, well, let me check this. And before you know it, we're doing this video. So, but I remember it was extremely important to me to have something set in my mind as far as where the numbers stacked up when it came to the 2 teams that participated in the Super Bowl and where they were at the end of the season.
All right. Well, the progression of our discussion came in as to how we were going to take this information when you had a matchup. So Team A is playing Team B. Team A's been winning by net points of 30. Team B has been winning, but by only net points of plus 10. So Team A is playing Team B now. And that's when we came up with the concept of the bias. The bias being a way to describe the fact that we're not saying that this team is going to win. But when the little dog's fighting the big dog, you kind of think that the big dog has an advantage. It's kind of a make sense thing. And so we called it the bias, and we said that it favored the team with the greater net points. So Team A, 30 net points playing Team B, 10 net points. The difference of 20 favors Team A because they had the greater of the two. Therefore, they have the bias. Later on, we fine-tune that a little bit with the plus. So we put out the bias plus reports, and the plus is turnover differential. Just like net points, where you can have a positive and a negative, turnover differential is the same way. I believe that at the end of the 2020 season, the Eagles were almost 32nd. They had been almost 32nd all year long. I believe they improved a few slots, but they were like in the low minuses for turnover differential. And then you had teams at the top. Those teams who have a positive turnover differential tend to have better records. And I can tell you as a Madden guy, and yes, I am a Madden guy. You can reach me at bmitch3, BMITCH3 on PlayStation 5. Yeah, but come at your own peril. In any event, so when you have that matchup, the bias, favors that other team. You add turnover differential, which is the plus, and now we have an even more precise way to kind of look at what these teams have actually accomplished and giving them credit as they move toward the matchups. So that's where we have that. Let's take a quick look at the last couple years. And like I said, this was not part of originally when we were doing just the net point rankings. We didn't really have the bias built in yet, hadn't come up with that concept. But if we go back to Super Bowl 53, Patriots Rams, the net point bias actually favored the Rams. The turnover differential was a tie. They were equal turnover differential. So the bias plus score of 24 actually favored the Rams. And we know that that turned out to be for the Patriots. So that's okay. It works. Nothing works all the time. Nothing says that this is a definitive situation. It happened again in Super Bowl 54. The Niners were actually favored. Now, a bias plus score of 5 is pretty small. So what we're saying there is that these are two very closely matched teams. Ben, Super Bowl 53, what happened with the Rams? Where'd they go wrong?
Oh, my goodness. Where did they go wrong? Wow. You're really testing my memory.
I didn't even remember it was the Rams in it, but I keep remembering I'm talking about Goff being in the Super Bowl.
Yes. There's a lot of talk out there about Jared Goff right now because he was just traded to the Detroit Lions for Matthew Stafford. But in that conversation, it is brought up quite often that he was just recently in a Super Bowl. I don't want to say necessarily what went wrong for the Rams. I think it was more of what went right for the Patriots, to tell you the truth. They just first of all, the bias was 24. That's a pretty good bias, but you shouldn't look at it like a point spread. So if you get that point spread thing out of your head, 24 isn't that big. We've had much huger biases. However, for a Super Bowl game, 24 is pretty good bias. The Rams were doing really well. I would venture to guess, I guess you have it back on that other graphic that you showed, that they were scoring a lot of points. Their points for numbers were probably pretty big. Their points against numbers were probably fairly low. But the Patriots just figured them out. I mean, we can do whatever we want with the numbers, but football is still a, what have you done for me lately type of game, man. It's any given Sunday and all that stuff. There's plenty of cliches out there and they all apply. You never know which one's going to apply on what day. But I think that's more what happened to the Rams was what actually went well for the Patriots.
The 54, my San Francisco 49ers, led by one Colin Kaepernick. No, I jumped all the way back to the Ravens, led by one Jimmy Garoppolo.
I know you love the Niners, but we don't need a history lesson right now.
Man, I just snapped back to Kaepernick.
Jimmy G.
Well, at least we've been, we've been in Super Bowls recently. If an old guy like me can remember that, then it must have been kind of recent. But Kansas City, man, net points 6 favored the San Francisco 49ers. The turnover differential bias favored Kansas City in that game. And so it mitigated the final bias plus score, but it still favored San Fran. And I do believe and that these are gross numbers. You'll notice for Super Bowl 55, it has 1.4. That's an average number. We go back and forth between gross and average depending on bye weeks and things of that nature. So I don't even remember. I'm pretty sure those are gross numbers and not average numbers. But this one right now, Super Bowl 55 double nickels, as you can see, has a bias plus score of 1.4 favoring the Buccaneers. So that's how we look at it. That's how we say it. We say that this isn't saying that the Bucs are definitely going to win, but what we're saying is that when you look at their net points over a season and you look at their turnover differential over a season, that's how close it is. It's razor thin between the two teams. So in the next segment, on Ben and Barry on football, we're going to talk a little bit more about the in-depth strategies and tactics of the game, some of the actual personnel matchups. We'll let Mr. Dickerson here utilize some of that fantasy knowledge for some of these players so we can talk about who's who. But in the background, I have my Madden up, so I know what their ratings are numerically for Madden. So you can argue fantasy, I can argue Madden, and we'll take it to the next level on this next section. The bias plus reports, as we just said, 1.4 favored the Tampa Bay, or favors the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Benny, didn't you go with the bias last week, or did you beg off of it?
I believe I did go with the bias last week and I lost.
Well, you couldn't have. They ain't played the game yet.
Oh, you mean for this game, for the Super Bowl? No. I did not make my Super Bowl pick yet.
Oh, you held off. Okay.
I held off. And let me just remind people, when we do this every week during the regular season, we give the bias plus report, we say who's favored, and then I make my choice, and I do not always go with the bias. And my winning record is pretty good.
I call it the Dickerson report.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So let's not get it twisted. The bias plus says that the Buccaneers are favored based on the numbers. That's it. That's all.
There you go. All right. Well, let's talk about the game. I think that this game is intriguing because of the level of quarterback play on both teams, but the distinctly different styles of the two teams. The Chiefs, that style, the motions, the options, all of the stuff that the Chiefs bring, the versatility, versus the Buccaneers, who are more of a standard team. You got your standard pocket quarterback in Brady, but the intellectual level, that thought process level, is about as high as you can get. So I just think this is going to come down to probably what really it came down to when we were looking at that Broncos-Panthers game, and it's about which defensive line is going to dominate. That is the question that I have.
And I agree with you that this is a very intriguing game. I agree that you have two really good offenses that can be dynamic at times, one probably a little bit more than the other, that being the Chiefs. but you also have a team in the Buccaneers, offensively speaking, of course, that you use the word standard. I'm going to agree with that. Okay. But what they do extremely well because they have playmakers all over the place. They are loaded at wide receiver, and they have two really good running backs. So, and I've been touting them from midseason all the way through to the end. When we talked about receiving cores, I kept saying, nobody's talking about the Buccaneers. And I even teased you a couple of times. I said, after Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce, name me two or three Kansas City Chief wide receivers. And it's not that easy. You can't spit them out unless you really, really, really follow those kind of things as far as receiver cores are concerned, or you're a Kansas City football fan. I mean, Sammy Watkins, Byron Pringle, Demarcus Robinson. Besides Sammy Watkins, those are not household names. Byron Pringle, really? He's a punt returner, but guess what? He's a wide receiver on that team. The one thing, let me not leave out Mecole Hardman, okay?
Thank you.
One great thing that you can say about the wide receiver core of the Kansas City Chiefs is they are all fast. All of them. All of them. Now, as far as numbers are concerned, we could go back and forth. I don't know. You want me to get into this position to position, or how you want to start this thing?
What do you think is the crucial matchup that we should be focusing on when we're looking at this game?
Okay. As soon as you said that, I remember where you left off at, and that was defense. And you said that the defensive lines up front.
That's what I think.
Difference makers.
I remember taking it back again to Cam. Cam was so mobile. We looked at so mobile, but that rush, that Bronco rush, man, he was under pressure.
Yeah. So I'm going to take it a step further. I agree with you that what happens up front is extremely important. Probably a little more important when it comes to pass rush as opposed to stopping the run, because let's face it, both of these teams really live through the air. They really, really live through the air. There's going to be more passes than runs almost every time. And I believe in this game, you're going to see a tremendous amount of passing in this game. And so the pass rushes of the two different defenses is going to make a big difference. But you got to look at the secondaries also. I've talked about the Bucs secondary quite a bit. People were loving them early on, and then people stopped talking about them because they were having a little tough time stopping some teams that had dynamic passing games. But that was because they're all extremely young. So they're young, they're pretty big guys, they're all fast, they can all cover a lot of ground, but they didn't have a lot of experience. Well, guess what? It's the end of the season now. It's the last game. They've gotten all the experience they need. They're at the top of their game right now. So that's a big plus for the Buccaneers secondary. However, the Chiefs secondary is no slouch. And Tyrann Mathieu, the old honey badger, as they used to call him, okay, is still back there. He's like, who do I want to compare him to? He's kind of playing a Troy Polamalu role, okay? You kind of don't ever know where he's going to be. Tom Brady said it himself. Every time we come to the line of scrimmage, I have to figure out where 32 is. Like, he's all over the place. He's in coverage. He mans up sometimes, plays a slot receiver. He blitzes. He's a Jamal Adams type dude. And it's going to be tough to keep an eye on him and still go through your progressions in the passing game. So both defenses present quite a challenge to each quarterback. Obviously, Tom Brady has the advantage when it comes to experience as far as the number of times he's been to Super Bowls and the number of years that he has under his belt. But by the same token, Patrick Mahomes has a great deal of experience, because and success. And this is his second Super Bowl in a row, coming off a win from last season. So it's a tough one to call. It's really tough.
You know, the funny thing is, on the game, Tom Brady is rated overall 96. What do you think Patrick Mahomes is rated?
98.
98?
That's off the top of my head. I do not play Madden.
That's true.
I'm going to say 98.
That is so true. Now, why do you think Madden would rate him higher than Tom Brady?
Because in my limited knowledge of Madden, I believe they do their ratings on an individual basis, the skills of that particular player, not necessarily taking into consideration the offense that he plays in. Would that be a true assumption?
I'll say yes for right now.
Okay. So I see a guy with a little more arm strength, a little better running ability. So I got to rate him higher.
Not bad, Benny. Not
Pretty
bad.
good, huh?
He's
Okay.
99.
Okay.
He's 90. There is no 100. I don't think there might have been maybe one. I can't imagine who that was, Randy Moss or somebody. But beside that, no. Always 99. There's a list of 99 players. It's like when you make the 99 club, you know, they start sending you gold shoes and funny stuff like that. So yeah, it's a big deal. But that's the other difference, you know. So let's make our choice. Let's unless you have something else you want to add to the conversation right now in terms of what to think about between these two teams. Wait, before we go, we didn't talk brain trust yet. Who might outcoach who in this particular? Yeah. And let me say this much. I couldn't even, neither one of those teams are our team. So, we're just in it for the football. If I were going to root, I might root for the team that had maybe the most minority coaches, because it's such an issue right now. And none of these coaches are really getting the love and respect. We're going to talk about that a little bit more in the commentary section. But I don't know if there's a big difference. I haven't had a chance to look at them from that perspective. But just from the perspective of, you got Andy Reid with an extra week off, okay, with Eric Bieniemy, who's probably one of the more creative offensive minds, but I think he's kind of overshadowed by Andy Reid because everybody just says it's the Andy Reid offense, And like you said, their defense has not been bad. Their defense has not been bad at all. And that kind of applied to both. But the thought about Tom Brady at 96, Patrick Mahomes at 99. The other thing that what they said was that the offensive line for the Chiefs is sort of all their backups. I don't think they have many starters there.
I looked at the injury reports briefly. I believe one of their starting linemen is probably not going to play and has been out for most of the season. They have another guy who's been injured for the last few games who they kind of expect to be back. Anybody that they projected as a starter early in the season who is not playing now, I believe basically went down early. So again, the guy that's playing in his spot may be a backup, but he's got a lot of games under his belt. Okay, so they're still playing as a pretty solid unit. We're talking about the Chiefs' offensive line, right?
Yeah,
they're still playing pretty well as a really good offensive unit. And although I made the statement that I believe there's going to be a lot of passes thrown in this Super Bowl game, I would say that the Chiefs' offensive line is better built for pass blocking than they are for run blocking. The Buccaneers' offensive line is built to be really good at both. So when it comes to offensive lines, I would check off the Tampa Bay Buccaneers just
You
to
think
do
the
that
Tampa Bay
comparison thing for you.
Buccaneers offensive line should fare better against the Chiefs defensive line
Yes.
than what the Chiefs offensive line would fare against the Buccaneers defensive line?
Yes. So when you said the intriguing part of the game would be what happens up front, I would give the nod to the Buccaneers.
Okay. Okay. All right. So you have your better front or your defensive pressure coming from the Buccaneers, but you've got a more mobile and very savvy with a ridiculous arm, Patrick Mahomes.
Right.
You
But
think
remember, I just did in the trenches here. I didn't take that. Obviously, that's a plus for the Chiefs. So I'm not saying the Buccaneers are going to win the game because they're going to win the war in the trenches. I can't just flat out say that. I would say that they have the advantage in the trenches. But when you add in an extremely mobile quarterback who throws the ball with all different kind of arm angles and can make every throw in the book, that adds a new dimension to the Chiefs offense, which is something that the Buccaneers front is going to have to compete with. That's another dimension that adds on to an offensive line that is not bad. They're good. I'm just saying they pass block better than they run block. That's all I'm saying. Where the Buccaneers up front on offense do both things really well, and the Buccaneers defensive line rushes the passer extremely well. Let me put it this way. And again, I'm not saying who I'm picking to win yet. I'm not going to say that to the end. However, overall, the Buccaneers defense, and I'm not talking about net point power rankings now, I'm talking about NFL rankings, ranked them, the Tampa Bay defense, 6th in the league overall. That's taken into consideration sacks, fumbles, interceptions, touchdowns scored defensively, yardage given up on the run, yardage given up in the pass, all those things collectively, they rank 6th, okay? The Chiefs, using all the same categories, finished ranked 16th, okay? So again, defensively, the nod goes to the Buccaneers.
That's one of the great points about the way we look at stuff versus the way that, those rankings that you have right there, defensive rankings. When we look at the Buccaneers ranking on points against, they were 9th, giving up 22.3 average points against. The Chiefs were 10th, giving up 22.4 points per game.
Right,
So,
which tells you the Chiefs may have given up yardage. Teams may have been able to move the ball on them, but they couldn't score. And let's face it, that's what it's all about. So I'm not poo-pooing the Chiefs defense whatsoever. You go, oh, they're 6th and they're 16th. No. You got to score touchdowns to win the game. Okay. So I'm not throwing any shade toward the Chiefs defense at all. Teams struggle to score on them, period. And that's important.
Well, they were in tight, low-scoring games to some degree, and again, that's why their offensive production looked to be down a little bit.
They were in tight, high-scoring games too.
Well, they had a few, but I mean, they were again going into the game last week, the conference championship. They were only averaging 22 points per game. For the Chiefs, that's low. When you think about the Chiefs in terms of scoring, you expect them to be, in the 30-point on average. Maybe
Yeah, but that was a reflection of what they were doing coming down the stretch. So we're talking what, like week 12?
But that was overall on the season, including the playoffs.
Right, but if you looked, and I'm not asking you to do it, but I'm pretty sure if you look back to the rankings as of say week 8, they were in the 30s.
Well, that's possible.
Okay. All right. So that was kind of an end of the season type of thing. And, but it is what it is. that was the overall number. You're right. So, you know, we have to take all that into consideration. And when it's funny, I was talking about touchdowns. The Buccaneers defense gave up a total of 59 touchdowns this season. The Chiefs defense gave up a total of 57. So yeah, it's still tight. Believe me, I'm not saying nothing bad about the Chiefs defense at all. They were right there. They were right there.
That is one of the things that really makes this game so intriguing. How close they are relative to their defenses, and again relative to their offensive production. And I mean, coming down the stretch, like I said, it was a surprise to see the Chiefs score in the 30s. I thought they were going to hold closer to trend, but I do believe that the Bills' defense was not ready for that speed, and they also had, as we said, or as I said in last week's show, their quarterback had some mind farts that didn't help at all. So, you know, some of those things really, you know, put them in a bad position.
Yeah.
Don't expect too many mind farts between these two quarterbacks, but Brady had a couple in that Green Bay game. A couple of those deep throws where either they just weren't on the same page, and one of them, the Green Bay Packers, just if you just catch it, just catch the ball, and it's yours, you know. But he actually put that thing out there a couple times and had me question a couple of things that he's doing, that he did. Everybody makes mistakes. We all have mind farts. I don't care how much you practice that stuff over and over. Somebody, you know, you expect somebody to do something, they don't do it. You go to the next guy and wrong decision. So it happens. You know, you just can't have a lot of those things like Josh Allen, where you're getting sacked for 10, 15 yards. You know, those things, you can't have those in games. Just put yourself in really bad situations where now you have to pass and they know you have to pass.
Yeah.
So, okay.
Let's face it, the numbers are important. The numbers tell you a whole lot, but they can't tell you everything. That's why they play the games. Okay? A team can come in ranked high, looking great, quarterbacks having a career season. Yeah, I'm talking about the Bills. And then all of a sudden, the wheels fall off. It can happen, man. That's part of what makes the game of football so great.
We take a look at the bias from a couple of perspectives. You know, we look at the teams' matchups on what's coming on. We'll talk about that. We also look back, and in those situations where the bias favored one team or another, you know, and that one team overcame that bias and actually won, we actually celebrate them. We'll talk about that. But you're absolutely right. And that's what makes it fun, because you see situations, and as I said, you can put a number to why that team is favored now. You know, you can say, yeah, they're favored because they've been outscoring everybody by an average of X points. And now all of a sudden they've come up against a team that has not been outscoring. They might have been losing by X points, and boom, that team flips the script and wins that game. That's where, you know, the favorite gets beaten, and we actually celebrate that. So, you ready to make your call here?
Do I have to? I guess
No.
I do. I guess I do, since this is the last video we're going to make before the game gets played.
That's true there. You don't get another chance.
Okay, this is how I see it. And you know, we talked a lot about defense, and I have no problem with that, because and I believe you also still believe the defense wins championships. You have to slow down the other team. You have to try to take something away from them that they do well and make them beat you in a way that suits you. Okay, you have to put pressure on these quarterbacks, especially quarterbacks of the caliber of the two that are playing in this game coming up. You have to do that. That's why defense is so, so important. However, we got game breakers and we got star power on both of these offenses. But the Chiefs offense, has some really, really stellar guys. And the two main stellar guys are Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce. They are going to be extremely difficult to handle. Sammy Watkins practiced in a limited fashion today and yesterday, so he'll be ramping it up. It looks like he's going to be a go to play in this game. That's just more trouble for the Bucs defense. They're going to be hard pressed. I think what they're going to attempt to do is they're going to try to double Tyreek and take their chances with Kelce, which might sound crazy because actually Kelce had the better year statistically than Tyreek Hill. Can you believe that?
It depends on what you mean by better.
Okay. Tyreek Hill was targeted 135 times, Kelce 145. Tyreek Hill caught 87 passes, Kelce 105. Tyreek Hill gained 1,276 yards. Kelce, 1,416 yards. Need I go on? Here's a big one. Here's a big one. Tyreek Hill, and we know how he is with yards after catch, right? He averaged 14.7 yards per catch. 14.7 per catch. Kelce, 13.5, right behind him.
The interesting thing is that you know that they can play a great over-under game, and a lot of times your tight end is going to have the better numbers because in all of those situations, he's just a great big target. And Kelce has great hands, and he's very symbiotic with Patrick Mahomes. So, but either way, those are two just ridiculous weapons. That's the bottom line that the Buccaneers defense is going to have to corral. So as I look at it, even Madden sort of agrees with you, because when you look at the Buccaneers, as far as just Madden ratings top to bottom, Brady being a 96, Mike Evans a 91, their middle linebacker Levante Davis is a 90. Now that is a wild card there. They have pretty decent, if not great, speed at their defensive at their linebacker position. However, if you're looking at 90 some rated players, you've got 3 here for the Buccaneers. If you switch over to the Chiefs real quick, you've got Mahomes at 99, Kelce at 99, and Hill at 98. You got Tyrann Mathieu at 95. You have Mitchell Schwartz at 9. I don't know, is he playing or not? Is he still in there?
I believe Schwartz practiced in a limited fashion, and he's still questionable.
He's a 94, and Chris Jones is a 92. So just in terms of having 90 rated players, really ultra high rated players, that edge definitely goes to the Chiefs.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And they're not all on offense. Like most of them are on offense, but they have defensive guys as well.
You mentioned them, Mr. Mathieu.
Yeah. You
mentioned them.
Ooh, boy, oh boy, I tell you.
And when you look at speed, Tyreek Hill is a 99. There's nobody else that is a 99.
And we know speed kills.
Speed kills, Speed kills as much. And the thing about him, I think is so funny is you can throw a ball to him. How tall is he? Like 5'9"?
5'10", I think he's a stretch.
You can throw a ball to him like he's 6'4" because he jumps.
Oh, he's got bunnies. He gets up. Oh, yeah.
I think it's shocking to some of these backs when they look up and see that, wait a minute, he's above me. These guys are.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
He's hilarious in terms of that. So, okay. Anything else you want to add to this formula?
I mean, I could go on and on, but I guess I got to make a pick. All right, one last thing, and I'm going to make my pick. The Buccaneers defense had 48 sacks. Chiefs defense had 32 sacks. Mahomes runs around a lot, sometimes just because he can, sometimes out of necessity. But Brady stays pretty clean. That being said, I'm going with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I'm going with the bias. I'm picking the Bucks.
Okay, going with the bias, picking the Bucks. I'm going with the Chiefs.
Okay.
I'm just, I was so surprised at what they put together last week with the Bills, and I just think that the speed matchup goes in their favor, and so we'll have to see. As long as Mahomes can keep himself from getting hurt by JPP and Sue. Who else? They got another guy on that defensive line.
Shaq Barrett.
Shaq.
and Levante. Now just remember, if he starts rolling out and he breaks the line of scrimmage, Levante David's on his butt. I was about to say something else.
Yeah.
It's not going to be pretty if he don't make it to
the thing
the
is this,
sideline.
and you pointed this out when you talked about Kelce. A lot of Kelce, you talk about yard after catch. A lot of Kelce's yardage is after catch. He's very slippery.
Oh, he's slippery and he breaks tackles, no doubt.
Yeah. So, and I do think that they actually are prepared to play the short passing game. I think coming out of that, who I kept thinking about when Mahomes was hurt with his foot, he had the toe injury, turf toe. I kept thinking about McNabb. Remember when McNabb hurt his ankle and we said he actually played better because he stayed in the pocket and got rid of the ball quickly?
Yes, he stayed within himself and didn't try to do too much.
Absolutely. And that's kind of what Mahomes reminded me of. So in terms of dissecting the defense, there's not much difference. He's a 98 in awareness on the game, and we know that Brady's right there. It's the additional mobility, but I do think that with that speed, they're actually going to play a short game and get that ball out of his hands very quickly. So the other part that we really didn't talk about was the actual run game. And I'm always surprised at the Chiefs' run game because what they show you, and again, I always compare it to, I don't always, but I've been comparing it to Canadian football, where they got a guy running around back and forth in the background there, and this guy's moving right around in there, but it's a dive play. And they get 8 yards off that thing because somebody basically gets out of position and they take full advantage of it, and they know how to operate with pace. So I think this is going to be a great game. I think that the Buccaneers deserve the bias plus because their numbers are what they are. But on this one particular day, I'm going to say that I think that the Chiefs have the advantage matchup-wise, personnel-wise, and that's why I'm saying Chiefs.
I can understand that. Yes, sir.
You asked for it, you got it, but we also talked about what happens with the bias plus. A fun thing that we like to talk about is when a team overcomes the bias. The Kansas City Chiefs were not favored in their conference championship. They were the out of favor team. The bias went against them by only a small score of 1.7. But they won by 14, and they had what we call the bias plus Buster score of 15.7. So you can find all of these bias plus scores at both Ben and Barry on football and at the Sterling Net Point Power Rankings on Facebook and on our social media pages. All right, Benny. We normally wrap up things with the final segment. And we're going to do that today, where we're going to talk a little bit about commentary. We normally go to our social media page. We talked a little bit about the black coaches. I mentioned that the coaches on our Super Bowl team, the minority coaches, didn't seem to be getting a lot of love. Forbes article stating here NFL teams egregiously passing on black head coaches shows the Rooney Rule can't change biases. Interesting, they use the word bias, eh?
Yeah,
The
well,
bias is in effect.
Unfortunately, yeah.
The bias is always in effect. That's just people, man. That's just how it is. But our bias, at least, is based on numbers, and it's not based on our opinion. I think that Andy Reid, his shadow, is actually shadowing over his offensive coordinator. But I also think that these owners, they put together some things in this quote social awareness movement where they're like, we have programs now where we can have minority coaches become coordinators, which is going to position them for head coaching jobs. So they've kind of put together a bureaucracy now that I believe that they're going to have to be held accountable to. But before that bureaucracy could really kick in and have coaches go through the program, they're going to do what they want to do. They go ahead and hiring the people that they want to hire, regardless, of those same bureaucratic processes that they put in place. And that's why they jumped on it as hard as they have, and acted almost in what's the word I'm looking for? In contempt of what they're actually saying, in defiance of their own social, teachings or what they're saying socially.
Well, let's be clear, and this is just my opinion. What they're saying now is something that they were quote unquote forced into. So they're trying to say the right things so that it'll look like, and I'm not saying that they're liars or whatever. I don't want to be that blatant, but they're being kind of moved into a corner. And I think that they realize the importance of minority hiring, what it means to the coaches, the players, the fans, and how it looks for the brand overall. And I'm speaking of the NFL brand. But let's face it, these guys are all successful businessmen. They've made their fortunes, most of them, in something other than football. Okay? They're used to doing things a certain way. That's the way they like to do it. That's the way they want to continue to do it. So they're not just going to jump and fall in line because somebody said, hey, the NFL, as far as players are concerned, is 70%, 75% black. Therefore, it only makes sense that we have more black guys in management, GMs, head coaches, offensive and defensive coordinators, at least. That's not going to sit well with people who are used to calling the shots and call the shots the way they want to for whatever their particular reason happens to be. I mean, it's just not something that's going to happen overnight. And we had this discussion when the Rooney Rule first came out. And the first thing I said was, you know what? These guys are going to line up 2 or 3 black guys, bring them in, interview them, and then tell them, I'll see you later. And they're going to hire who they want anyway. And that's still going on, even with the incentives that have been put in. So if teams implement these programs to help identify qualified minority candidates and to help them better their chances of being qualified to be candidates for these jobs, that's great. That's a plus. But they have to see it through. You know what I mean? And even after they see it through, look at Bieniemy. If there's anybody who should have been hired as a head coach this season, going into next season, it should have been him. He checks off all the boxes. It's funny. he checks off all the boxes, that we know of. Obviously, you go into a closed door meeting with a person that owns a team, or any employer for that matter, and they ask you questions, and they look at your resume, and they put you in situations and pose. So if this happened, what would you do? If that happened, what would you do? How would you handle a situation like this and all that? We don't know what goes on there. Okay. But as far as never been a head coach is probably the only box he doesn't check. Okay. Talking about Deuce Staley, I heard, well, he's never been an offensive coordinator. So if he doesn't get hired because he's never been an offensive coordinator, but Bieniemy has been an offensive coordinator, but you don't hire him either, what is it?
And let me add to that. You can say that Deuce was not an offensive coordinator, but he was the assistant
head coach.
Right.
I thought about that. And you know what I think that really means? I think that means that if Doug had gotten fired like week 10, Deuce would have been the interim head coach because he was the assistant head coach. And they'd have played out the season with him as the interim head coach. And then they would have found a new coach, which they've already done. Okay.
Thought.
Right. Other than that,
what's
does the title really hold any? That title doesn't hold anything, dude. You're a running back coach. You're a position coach. Not that there's anything wrong with a position coach. My team, the New York Giants, just promoted a guy from a position coach to head coach. So again, they're going to hire who they want for whatever reason they deem proper. And that's just the way it is. And you can't make them do anything.
It's interesting because when we looked at the brain, I call it the brain trust, everyone from the owner down to the head coach. The different teams have different executive formations.
Yes,
like they don't have the same hierarchies. It's not like it's owner, GM, head coach. They got all types of other little, so when you were saying you can't make them do anything, there's not even standardization in terms of that stuff. Now, maybe at some point that might happen. And I do believe that there are some improvements relative to the lower ranking coaches. You've had some, the Washington team just hired a black female coach. And so you're getting some of that. The women are coming on board now. And you have some organizations like the Fritz Pollard organization, which are dedicated to grooming African-American and minority coaches for head coaching and management positions.
And that is aside from what you spoke about when you said that the teams were setting up programs to help minority coaches move up the ranks. This Fritz Pollard organization is aside from the teams. Is it sponsored by the NFL or it's a standalone entity?
Standalone.
There you go. So I would trust that more than these team generated programs. Because the team,
the difference is because they're outside, you know what I mean? It's right. Well, anyway, we understand that there's still some challenges as you get to the head coach and the GM, but there are some improvements. There have been some hirings. Washington, for example, was a team that brought in minority candidates, in their management ranks. And so that's one team that flipped, tremendously from what they had previously been doing. So.
Yeah, just on that real fast, because I mentioned it last week and I didn't have the name correct. Lori Locust. We have a shout out to Lori Locust, female coach hired by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. She is the assistant defensive line coach. Okay. She actually coached for a semi-pro team, many members of which we know personally. Okay, the Central Penn Piranhas. I
Believe
have
I-
guys on my flag football team that
Right.
play for the Piranhas. I have guys that used to play in our league, in our flag football league, that play for the Piranhas. She has ascended from semi-pro football in Central Pennsylvania to assistant defensive line coach for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and is in line to get a ring if they win.
They win.
Shout out to Lori Locust. They call her Low Locust.
Well, you know, you've given me actually a personal reason to maybe root for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Even if I think
There you're torn already. Now you're already torn. Look at it. Look at you.
but you know something? And also just going back when we were looking at the last 5 Super Bowls, just how many the Patriots were in the last 5 years, whether they won.
Oh, yeah, well.
You know, it's like it's Patriots left and Patriots right. And now Tom Brady is right there again. So the other big news of the week, which for you as a fantasy guy, I can't imagine what you guys are doing now. Stafford going to the Rams for Jared Goff, 2 future first-round picks, a 3rd rounder. So I mean, the value of Stafford versus Goff was obviously greater if they had to sweeten the pot with all of those picks in order to equalize that thing out, man. Goff was really not in great stead in LA. What do you think?
Well, here's the crazy thing. I believe a move like this means to me that the organization feels that they are very close to going to and or winning another Super Bowl, and they're trying to make a move that's going to put them over the top, okay? This is the same kind of move, and don't get yourself all worked up here, but this is the same type of move.
Don't say it. Don't.
This is the same type of move that the Vikings made when they brought in Kirk Cousins.
You know why I was saying don't say it?
Why?
Because all week long, I'm watching Pro Football Talk, and all they keep talking about is Kirk Cousins taking Garoppolo's place. And I
know you didn't want to hear that.
I tweeted back at them, if they do, I am suspending my fanship. Not getting rid of it. I'll be back. I'm not going nowhere, but it has to go on suspension if they go get Kirk Cousins. I'd be livid. But in any event, I understand what you're saying. Vikings thought they were going to make that extra step to get them from where they were to the Super Bowl.
That's right. They thought if they made that move, that would get them over the top. Now, obviously it didn't, but guess what? Hey, you got to make moves, okay? This, I think, is what the Rams are doing. I think that they feel they have the players in place to get them back into a championship, but they did not believe that Jared Goff could lead them there. Therefore, they went with a guy that they felt was more proven as far as his skill set and what he can do as a leader and as a quarterback, and they brought him in. And I tell you what, they really believe it because the Vikings gave Cousins a lot of money. The Rams gave away their next 3 years of high draft picks. That is a major, major commitment. That's a major commitment. But I tell you what, I like Stafford. I've always liked Stafford. I played him in fantasy sometimes. I can't say he's going to be the answer for them, but I think I know what they're trying to do, and they pulled the trigger. What are you going to do?
Well, we have some new competition in the NFC West. It's gotten
there you go. They see that. That's more trouble for you.
That's
more trouble for you. And by the same token, the Lions are looking at, hey, Goff obviously has skills. Goff obviously was just in a Super Bowl recently, okay, and he's young. So it's not a bad move for a team that wasn't going anywhere anyway. That's he's their quarterback of the present and future.
I think they made a good trade. I think they made
Yes, I agree.
about it. All right. We always try to do something constructive. I found this and shared this on Ben and Barry on football. We all know this and we've kind of said it, but it's another thing to actually see the numbers up close and personal. So here they go, where we talk about focusing on the academics because just 0.03% of football players actually make it into the NFL, where you have 1,023,712, over 1 million kids playing high school ball, but only 61,000 will make it into the college. That's 6%. So there's a big drop right there.
Yeah, National Signing Day was just the other day too.
Oh yeah. It's been some fun stuff in National Signing Day, especially who was the one guy where the mom was mad because he signed with a different. She had like 2 sons wouldn't sign with her.
That happens every year. That happens every year.
But out of those 61,000, 6,000 are going to be scouted by the NFL. Now that's just scouted, okay? And 875,000 will sign an NFL contract. That's 0.0. That's less than the one. That's less than 0.1%. That's not even 0.1%. And only 300 will make an NFL roster. So 99.97% of kids who play high school football will not make it into the NFL. And that's why it is important. It is urgent. It is crucial that you focus on your academics. I always like to bring up our friend Corey Clement, who out of Glassboro High School was a Mr. All Everything running back, South Jersey, record breaker, breaking people like Ron Dane's record. But he got his academic act together in high school, got tutors, increased his SATs, and was able to get into Wisconsin on an academic scholarship.
That's tremendous.
That's
tremendous.
Anyone who knows will tell you an academic scholarship is actually more valuable than an athletic scholarship in most cases. My daughter got an academic scholarship to Kutztown. My son got an athletic scholarship to Kutztown. She got way more money than he got.
Oh, yo, put him out like that.
Well, I'm not trying to, but it's a fact,
No, I understand.
And he recognizes it. He recognizes it because of the way they do scholarships. Like, a football team might get, X amount of scholarships, but then they're going to try to divvy it out. Instead of giving it to 3 people, they want to give it to 7 people. So the amount of money each first kid gets is reduced, So they play those types of games. But if you get, a tuition scholarship, you know what I mean? Then you're talking a big lump sum of money. She didn't get 100%, but she got a lot more than he did. So that whole game of scholarship money is really a little funky. But long story short, focus on your academics because as I said to my niece, there's anecdotal evidence and then there's statistical evidence. So often we hear the anecdotal where you hear somebody say, if I can do it, you can do it. And positive mental aspect wise, I think that's a great thing. But statistically, because you made it in the NFL, statistically 99.97% of people aren't going to make it there. And that's just the other part of the reality, the yin and the yang of it, that has to be accounted for when you're making, your decisions in life. And you'll never go wrong, really, with a good education. There are a number of guys who went into college without finishing, went into the NFL without finishing college. And I'm thinking about Cardinals wide receiver
Larry
Fitzgerald, who said he promised his mother he would complete his degree, and he did that after going into the NFL. So even those guys who are making all of that money recognize the value of that additional education. So I'll get off the soapbox. Any last words on that?
Just that I think it's a great thing when I hear about not just Larry, but there's a lot of other guys that have done that, be it a promise to their parents or whatever, that it's been impressed upon them that their education is extremely important. And even though they've signed big money contracts with the NFL and it seems like their life is set, they still go back and get their degree because they understand that there is life after football and you want as good a life after football as you can possibly get. So it's a good idea to get on back to school, get that degree, and take care of the rest of your life after you retire. Because let's face it, you're probably going to be retiring. I was 50 when I retired. People are like, 50, that's all? People work till they're like 65 and 70 years old. NFL football players, most of them retire somewhere in their 30s. Okay. So, you know, that's there's nothing more important than a great education. Nothing more important.
Yeah, it's going to serve you, no matter what you decide to do. You look at a guy like Magic Johnson, who went on to, entrepreneurial success, and I'm seeing that in a lot of the guys. I think one of the guys that stood out to me, especially in terms of this modern technology, was Chris Bosh, who is a coder, and so you might not think of a guy who's won NBA championships as doing computer coding, but he's been big on that. He pushes STEM education and things of that nature. And let's face it, if you have a degree, you can maybe take a chance on the NFL because you have a better option in your career to get re-employed beyond that. And sometimes having that little NFL background might help you, open a couple doors for you, as you're moving through life with your degree.
There's a guy with the Chiefs that's a doctor who opted out this year so that he could help, serve his community with COVID, but he's got his medical degree already and made the NFL.
Yeah.
And had the freedom to opt out. And let's face it, there's some guys that thought about opting out and didn't do it because they needed that money. I'm just saying, you know what I mean? So there you go. Get that degree, man.
Get that degree. All right. That's it for me. Anything else for you?
You know me, man. I only got one other thing to say after talking about football. Go Noles.